Hi, thanks for joining me. A Christian worldview is informed by what you think of God. Today, I hope to expand that as we explore Psalm 104. It's been said, what you think about God is the most important thing about you. And that's true. When we talk about worldviews, like I mentioned, what you think about God is vitally important. In a Christian worldview, what we think about God, about nature, about creation, about ourselves, about the past, about the future, about the right now, a Christian worldview informs our perspective of all of that. And that Christian worldview is most influenced by what we think about God. Psalm 104 is it's a kind of lengthy psalm. And I don't say that like that's a bad thing, but it's longer. And I want to go through this psalm, but I can't go through every single line verse by verse. I want to go through it briefly and hit some things in here that I think that you'll find valuable, that I hope inform your perspective of God and lend to you a Christian worldview, especially during these times. So let's get into it. Psalm 104, there's no author assigned to this psalm. We don't know who wrote it, but it's still great and it's good. It begins, "Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great." This is almost from here on, the psalmist goes in to tell us how great is this God. It's almost like somebody asked him, so God is very great. Psalmist, tell me how great he is. And the psalmist says, oh, let me give you 35 verses and I'll tell you. So it's good. So he gets into a lot about what God has done in creation and how God sustains his creation and how all that God has created looks to him. Pay attention for pronouns in here. How often the psalmist refers to God, he or you, things like this. It begins, you are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a cloak, stretching out the heaven like a tent curtain. He lays beams of his upper chambers in the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He walks upon the wings of the wind. He makes the winds his messengers, flaming fires his ministers. So as we go through this, you'll see there's a lot of themes actually pointing directly back to creation. We see the heavens being drawn out like a tent curtain. We see the light being established. There's a lot of themes that go directly back to Genesis 1 and 2. It continues, he establishes the earth upon its foundations so that it will not totter forever and ever. You, again God, covered it with the deep as with a garment. Speaking about the waters were standing above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they hurried away. So we're talking about God separating land from water. Again, themes of Genesis 1 and 2. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the places where you established for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass over, so that they will not return to cover the earth. This kind of reminds us of the language of the flood, when God has the waters subside and reduce and promises to never destroy the earth again with water. In fact, this is why we love the rainbow. The rainbow is a sign of the Noahic covenant, where God promised to Noah and his descendants to never again destroy the flood. If you're unfamiliar with that covenant, go look at it, because it's actually more involved than just God promising never to flood the the whole earth again with water. There's a lot in there. A lot that applies today because the Noahic covenant, it's still in effect today. The psalmist continues, He, being God, sends forth springs in the valleys. They flow between the mountains. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them birds of the heavens dwell. They lift up their voices among the branches. He waters the mountains from his chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of his works. So here we see God has not only created everything, but here he's sustaining everything too. Everything that they need. And so much of this are things that we observe as well. See, the psalmist isn't reaching out to highfalutin ideas over here or impractical things over there. We see this happening all the time of animals. Here, we're talking about birds and things like this, and various animals in the mountains and beasts in the field. God providing for them. It's true. Man doesn't even do anything, and yet the wild animals are provided for by God. Isn't this what Jesus refers to when he talks about how God clothes and provides for even the small birds? Interesting. It continues. He, being God, do we see a theme yet? I mean, this just struck me as well, it's repetitive, but it struck me as the psalmist has a point here. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and the vegetation for the labor of man, so that he may bring forth food from the earth. So he's talking about the labor of man. This reminded me of something that I'd heard over the week. So in these times, people are concerned about losing jobs, and I was listening to one man on a podcast, and he was talking about how he's a government employee and how he's concerned about if he would go to church and there'd be repercussions of him going to church and not obeying some of the government's orders. And he reminded himself, who gave him that government job? Who gave him that job? God. And if God gave it to him, God can take it away and give it back. That these things are ultimately not in the control of men, of governments like we think they are, because ultimately men and governments are in the control of God. God is the one who sustains. It's really interesting. It continues. Speaking of man and God's sustenance of man, and wine which makes man's heart glad, so that he may make his face glisten with oil, and the food which sustains man's heart. Real briefly, if you notice, the animals have been provided with the things that the animals need, food and water, and I think later on he mentions the birds and nesting in the trees. Man is given other things that animals are not. It's interesting. Wine. The animals have no need of wine to make the heart glad. And oil to make the face glisten. And food which sustains man's heart. God is not concerned with just the physical aspects like we would be concerned with physically taking care of animals. God has made man different. Mankind, all of human, men and women, were made in the image of God. And this is reflected here in the psalmist's message about wine and oil and things that go beyond just the mere physical sustaining of our lives. God is a good God. He's a great God. The psalmist continues. The trees of the Lord drink their fill, the cedars of Lebanon which he planted, where the birds build their nests, and the stork whose home is in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats, the cliffs are a refuge for the Shephanim. I think that's how you pronounce it. Up to this point, God has created everything. Up to this point, God has sustained everything, even man, even women, in a special way. Now, in verse 19, there is something interesting. He made the moons for the seasons, and the sun knows the place of its setting. You appoint darkness, and it becomes night, in which all the beasts of the forest prowl about. The young lions roar after their prey and seek their food from God. When the sun rises, they withdraw and lie down in their dens. Man goes forth to his work and to his labor until evening. What's interesting in this is there's a real temporal aspect here that we haven't seen in the previous verses. Note seasons and the sun setting and uh, God appointing darkness, and God appointing sun rising and evening, and there's that idea of time. This is a very temporal aspect to God's creation, and it bears a minute of thinking about. We in modernity of 2020, in our contemporary age, there's a lot we can do. I mean, we can send men to the moon. We can send men to the bottom of the sea. We can send men through a mountain. We can do many different things. There's all kinds of sicknesses that we can cure. There's all sorts of things that we can do. Time. What's that phrase? The certain things of this world are death and taxes. And time would also be one of those things. Man does not impact time. It passes. But time is not over God. It is God and time. Time has been made by God. He reigns over it. In fact, in the Bible it says 1,000 years are as a day to the Lord. Our God is a God who works above time. But he's given us time. If all things have been created by God and are good, time is a good thing for us. And it's a great thing to remember that we have a God who reigns above time. Interesting. The psalmist continues, O Lord, how many are your works? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. I have to stop again, sorry. How many are your works? It's almost like the psalmist is saying, I got to stop. I can't count them all. I mean, he's been listing all kinds of animals, all kinds of trees, vegetation, mountains, waters, the heavens, the skies, the lights. I mean, it's almost like a summary. Oh, Lord, how many are your works? The psalmist has to stop. He's going to run out of trees to write on. And there's one more thing here. The earth is full of your possessions. Does your Christian worldview, does your perspective of God view everything as God's own possession? All things belong to God. It's a really liberating thought. In fact, you would think it'd be ironic almost that, but it's liberating to know that I am God's possession. It's a very liberating thing. And that doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. God is the creator, and all things are accountable to him. It's a wonderful thought. The psalmist continues, there is the sea, great and broad, in which are swarms without number. I mean, the psalmist is going to run out of the ink if he names them all. Animals both small and great. There are ships moving along, and Leviathan which you form to sport in it. That's a really cool expression there. And the Leviathan which you form to sport in it. And that's going to actually, I'm going to tie into that here at the end of, when we get into the few more verses. They wait for you to give them food in their season. You give it to them and they gather it up. You open your hand and they are satisfied with good. All creation is reliant upon God. Not only did he create them, but they need him. We need God. You hide your face, they are dismayed. Is this not true? Have you ever sensed in your life, whether it be from sin or distractions that ought not to distract you from God, that to be without him causes great dismay? It's true. He continues, you take away their spirit, they expire, and they return to their dust. This is true as well. God is the creator. He's the life giver. He is also the life taker. No one dies too early in the perspective of God. For whatever his reasons are, for whatever he has purposed, even if we don't know it, even if we can't wrap our brains around it, we can know that he is the one who determines it. And if he's been good in giving life, well, in the taking of life, he is also good. Death was not originally there in the garden until we sinned in Adam. When Adam and Eve took for what they should not have taken from the tree, they disobeyed God, and death entered. It's a sad thing. It's a very sad thing. But it is a reality of this world. And yet, God reigns over it all. And we can trust that even if when God decides to remove somebody from this earth, take away their spirit so that their body returns to dust, he has plans and purposes, and he can be trusted in it, even and especially when we don't understand it. You send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Verse 31, to this point, what should our reaction be? All these glorious things, even the sobering things about God, who is a creator and also and a life giver and also a life taker. All these things, and the psalmist kind of now narrows down his perspective and the response that he has to that perspective. Let the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord be glad in his works. This is a Christian worldview, to desire that the glory of the Lord should endure forever, that he should be glad in his works. I mean, when you look at the sunrise, the sunset, the mountains, those or the animals that we love, the people that we love, when we appreciate them, when our hearts are made glad in them, we ought to remember and know God is also glad and rejoicing in his work, in his sustaining work as well, of whatever the object is, whatever the thing is that is filling our heart and our mind with joy. We are never enjoying nature, creation alone, for God has already been enjoying it since he created it. We are only joining in with God. We are not the first person to have enjoyed anything ever. For God has already been enjoying it long before he created us. Interesting thought. He looks at the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. Our God is a mighty God. He is not an impotent God. He is not a powerless God. He touches mountains and they smoke. He looks at the earth and it trembles. If you remember Psalm 46, in another video I did, I talked about God as the great mover. In Psalm 46, it talks about mountains moving into the heart of the sea and waters roaring and raging. And here we see God is the great mover still, continually. These things do not happen outside of God's knowledge and will. He pushes his finger on them and they smoke. And so the psalmist continues in his response. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. Let my meditations be pleasing to him. As for me, I shall be glad in the Lord. This is a right response to everything that the psalmist has been describing, everything that's been filling the psalmist's mind, because his mind has been filled with this was created by God, this has been sustained by God, everything has been directed and pointing him back to God. And that is a Christian worldview. That is an anchor for all that we know. That is essentially a foundational building block of what it means to think about things rightly. Now, here in 35, one last thing. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. This almost seems out of place, where the heights of exaltation and praise to God that we see in the psalm is almost brought to a sudden halt. And he says, let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. I think that's largely because of a cultural context we have in Christianity that isn't necessarily biblical. We also ought to desire and sing this verse as heartily as we sing every other verse. Our love towards the lost is not that they would perish. God does not desire that they would perish, which is why we preach the gospel. that they may be saved. But we do look forward to the day when all things will be made right, when God will renew all things, and yes, remove the rebels, the sinners, the enemies, the wicked from this earth, and it may be enjoyed by God and by his creation without those elements that are opposed to him. And that is also part of a Christian worldview, a Christian hope that we desire. Until God should determine to remove them, we should tell them of his great love for them, the gospel, that though while we were sinners, Christ died for us, that all the wrong that we have done was paid for by Jesus, but not just that, we are given his perfection, that in God's sight we are filthy, we are wicked, our hearts continually are in rebellion against him, and he's just, and that has to be punished. But God sent his son, who took that punishment, who took all of hell for us. But not just that, Christ lived a perfect life, so that when God sees the sinner, when God saw me, a sinner who believed in Jesus, no longer did he see my sin, but he saw me in his son, Jesus Christ. He sees the perfection of his son, and I am not judged because Jesus took it, and Jesus gave me his perfection. That's called right standing with God, justification. The psalmist closes out the psalm here. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. It's the bracket. That's how the psalm began, and that's how it ends. Bless the Lord, O my soul. It reminds me of a song where it mentions that even the breath that we breathe, the air in our lungs with which we pour out praise to God, that's not even our breath. Remember what the psalmist said in here? Everything is God's possession. Even the breath that he created in the lungs that he created, that he gives to sustain us, that we use to praise him, it's his. It's his. And this is part of a Christian worldview. When we begin to recognize how big, how powerful, how good God is in everything, well, we are closer to his perspective of this world. Sometimes our eyes can grow dim and our heads can go down. I have family who live by mountains, and I can't help but think, I love mountains, first of all, how much they don't appreciate the mountains they live next to, probably because it's so repetitive. They're there all the time, and that's true for me too. Here I live in it's not a mountainous region. It's not by the sea or anything that would be spectacular or beautiful, and yet I probably don't appreciate it because it's become normal. And I don't want that to be true of God's creation. I want to appreciate it as he appreciates it. I want to have a perspective of my Maker and delight in it as he delights in it. Brother, sister, friend, that is part of a Christian worldview. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was encouraging. There's way more in this psalm. All the themes and echoes from Genesis 1 and 2 of creation are in here. Explore it. Think on it. Meditate on it. Let my meditation be pleasing to him. It certainly will be as you meditate on this psalm. Until next time, grace and peace and blessings from God.